Hello friends, and good to see you at the last stage and to the last lectures. So this last lecture is about the tables given in New Drug and Clinical Trial Rule 2019 and its content. This is the most important lecture of our course because if you have gone through all these lectures, you might have seen that all the requirements like data to be submitted for the clinical trial, manufacture, import, all this data requirement has been given in these tables, and these are the table which actually gives the requirement for submission of the any application. So it is we are giving the summary of all this so that it would be at one place and you could identify the which document required for which type of applications. So the expected outcome from this lecture, you would be knowing that what are the different tables given in different schedules and which are these schedules, what are the different key contents in the tables. Further, those which we have not covered earlier, for example, the data requirement for the phytopharmaceutical, what are the content of the ICF, what are the content of the information brochure, what are the content of PI, that is undertaking by the PI. So those which I have not covered, we are going to cover in detail in these lectures, and you would be knowing that. Then what are the data to be submitted along with clinical trial application, ethics committee, that though we have seen it in our earlier lecture, but again we will see here. So let us start with lecture 24. So I would like to brief about this. So there are 15 tables given in the fourth schedule of the New Drug and Clinical Trial rules, and these schedules are the second schedule. As we know, there are around 8 schedules, but the tables are given in only few of the schedules, and these schedules has been enlisted here. The second schedule, it has total number of tables, there are 4 numbers of tables. In the third schedule, there are around 8 different types of tables and the requirement given. In the fourth schedule, the number of tables given are 3. There is one more schedule, that is the seventh schedule, wherein there is no table but one annexure has been given, and then that annexure is related to the factor for calculation the amount of compensation, that will also. So let us start with the first schedule of table of content, and here it is a second schedule which is related to the requirement and guideline for permission to import or manufacture of new drug for sale or to undertake clinical trial. So this is regarding the permission to import or manufacture or to undertake a clinical trial. So in this schedule there are 4 tables. The first table is related to the data to be submitted along with the application to conduct clinical trial or import or manufacture of new drug for sale in the country. So import and manufacture, there is a separate lecture, we have seen that. The second table is related to the data to be submitted by an applicant for grant of permission to import or manufacture a new drug already approved in the country, that is we call as a subsequent new drug. So this also has been covered in our previous lecture. The third is regarding data required to be submitted by an applicant for conduct of clinical trial of an approved new drug with a new claim, new route of administration, new indication or new train. So what are the data to be submitted, data required to be submitted by an application while conducting clinical trial for the drug which is already approved in the country, that we will see in this schedule. The fourth table is related to the data to be submitted along with the application to conduct clinical trial or import or manufacture of a phytopharmaceutical drug. So this we will see in detail. So the first, as I have mentioned, data to be submitted by the applicant for the conduct of clinical trial study, and which is for the import or manufacture. So we have a separate lecture on this, so I am not going to read all this. If you wish, you can see this: the introduction, chemical pharmaceutical information, related information related to the drug, information related to its testing, then information related to the specification, validation, then data related to the formulation. If it is a fixed dose formulation, then data related to the FDC, then excipient compatibility, comparative evaluation, then stability study including photostability, force degradation, that is required to be submitted. Then with respect to the preclinical animal pharmacological study, animal toxicological study, that are required to be submitted. Then if it is a phase 3 study, then data with respect to the phase 1, phase 2 study, that is also required to be submitted along with the published literature. So that is about the first table. I am not going in depth because we have already covered in another lecture. The table number 2, it is also covered in the other lecture, and it is the data required to be submitted by an application for grant of permission to import or manufacture of new drug already approved into the country, means we call it as a subsequent new drug. So in this case also, the detail about the drug, chemical pharmaceutical information, detail about the dosage form and its composition, the test, the stability data, then what would be the package insert and the promotional literature, the specimen copy of that package insert, and that required to be submitted. Here the BAB study and the dissolution study is required for the oral dosage form, because the drug is already approved. Now it has just to establish whether it is efficacious or not. Then subacute animal toxicity study is also required if the dosage form is intravenous or infusion and the injectables. Now moving towards the table number 3, it is a data requirement and data required to be submitted by an applicant for conduct of clinical trial of an approved new drug with new claims, as I have mentioned, new dosage form, new route of administration and other, for the purpose of import or manufacture of such new drug for sale or distribution. So in this case, the number and date of permission or license approved granted for the approved new drug. As this is the data to be submitted for the subsequent new drug, it means the drug has already been approved. So details of the approval, that has to be submitted. Then why the new dosage form or new route of indication, that therapeutic justification has to be given. Then again they have to, the applicant have to give the chemical and pharmaceutical information to verify whether that is same or not, including the chemical name, code name, or any number, proprietary name, generic name, the structure of the drug. Then detail about the dosage form and its composition is required to be given. The test specification for active, inactive moieties. Further, the specification of finished product is also required to be given. And if it is a modified dosage form, then as I have said, the therapeutic justification, why they are going for the modified dosage form, that is required to be given. The clinical trial data as referred in our clause 1 of this schedule, and the regulatory status of the modified dosage form in others, either in other countries. If it is for example, if it is the tablet is approved and applicant is desired to manufacture a capsule, then whether that type of, that kind of dosage form, or if it is a different strain, then that a different kind of strain, whether it is available in the international market or not, that regulatory status has to be given. Then proposed package insert for that particular modified drug, that is required to be given. Then we are moving towards table number 4 of this schedule. It is related to the data requirement for the phytopharmaceutical drugs. So we have seen the definition of the phytopharmaceutical in our very initial lectures. So it is a drug which is having a minimum 4 bioactive ingredient. So in this data requirement, it has been divided into the two parts. The part A is data to be submitted by the applicant, means whatever the data the applicant is having and he has to submit, that has been given into the part 1, and part 2 is related to the data generated by the applicant, means the information which is not available but it has been generated by the applicant for the regulatory approval. So let us see the part first. Here the applicant is required to give the brief description or the summary of the phytopharmaceutical drug for which he has applied. Then the published literature, if any available, that has to be provided with the application. Information on any contraindication or any side effects, and the published scientific report in respect of safety and pharmacological studies, that is required to be submitted. Where the process and uses are similar or same to the product known in traditional medicine or ethnomedicine, and where where the process or usage is different from that known in traditional medicine, in such cases also the published literature is required. Then if any side effect or adverse events for that drug known into the another market, that is also required to be submitted. Then what is the present usage of the phytopharmaceutical drug to establish history of usage, the details of the product manufacturer, then the quantity sold, then extent of exposure on human population, what we are doing in case of the drug like PSUR, that is periodic safety update, the exposure we are getting from the applicant. The same here, the applicant has to submit the quantum of the drug sold and the extent of the exposure. Then in this case also, though it is a phytopharmaceutical, the human or clinical pharmacology information is required. Then the pharmacodynamic information, if it is available, if it is the drug is already existing, then the pharmacodynamic information. Then the monograph, if published on the plant or product or extract of phytopharmaceutical, then the copies of all its publication with English translation has to be submitted. In addition to this, the data generated by the applicant, like identification of the drug, authentication, source of the plant, or it's a taxonomical identity which is given in the authorized book, or which is it is approved by some well-known taxonomist. So name and the species of that plant is required to be given. Then morphological and anatomical description giving diagnostic features, and photograph of the plant or part of further confirmation identity, that is also required to be given. See, this is something different from our new chemical entity, where we don't ask for the photographs. Here the plant photograph is also required, because that should be the real plant, and that should be matched with its taxonomical identity, and the code and its species also should have to be matched for its correct identification. So the photograph of that plant, and that should be approved by some known taxonomists. Then it's a natural habitat and geographical distribution of the plant. Also has to be mentioned whether the part of the plant use is renewable or destructive, and the source, whether it is cultivated or whether it is wild. Then the season or time of collection, when it is when it is a plant, so unlike the chemical entity, it would grow in some certain specific season. So the what is that season, that the information regarding that season has to be given. Source of the plant including its geographical location, season, and also the time of collection. Then a statement indicating whether the species is any of the following, where what I have mentioned here in the slide, that has to be given in the undertaking or in the statement form. The determined to be endangered or threatened under the Endangered Species Act, whether that plant is mentioned in this act or not. Or there is one CITES, we called it as a CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So whether that enlisted in the CITES or not, that has to be given. Whether it has entitled a special protection under the Biological Diversity Act 2002, so that also has to be mentioned. If the species is having any genotypic or chemotypic, ecotypic variability of the species, that is required to be given. Further, the list of grower or supplier that required to be given, who are the supplier, who are the cultivator of the plant. Then the harvest location, growth conditions, stage of plant growth, harvesting times, collection, washing after the harvesting, and for the processing, the collection, washing, drying, storage condition, how to handle the drug and how to handle it while transportation, the precaution to be taken, that has to be submitted. Then when it is into the manufacturing procedure, then what are the processes or manufacturing procedure the applicant is going to follow, that with respect to grinding, pulverization of the plant material, and sieving for getting uniform particle size, the details of the sieve and the sieve number, that is required to be submitted along with the application. Further, with respect to the chemical and analytical testing, the details about the specification, like foreign matters, the total ash contained in the powder, then acid insoluble ash, pesticide residue, heavy metals, and other chromatographic detail is required to be submitted. The applicant is required to give an undertaking to supply the specimen sample of a plant duly labeled and photocopy of the certificate of identity confirmation issued by a qualified taxonomist along with drawing of the photographs. As I have mentioned, he has to ensure the continued supply of the same specimen sample, and that sample has to be approved by the qualified taxonomist. Then in the manufacturing, the process of extraction and subsequent fractionation, if they are there, the detail of that required to be given, and detailed processes involved and the steps involved, that is also required to be given, like extraction, then solvent residue test, physicochemical test, microbial test, or the chromatographic finger profile and phytochemical reference markers, that everything regarding the testing that has to be submitted. Characterization of the purified extraction, then test for identification, what are the tests implied for the identification of the drug, that also should be covered. Further, here also we require the animal toxicity and the safety data, that is as per given in this table number 4. Regulatory status, as we as we see it in case of the chemical entity, the same here is also required. And in case if the phytopharmaceutical is already available in the market, then the data related to the post marketing surveillance, that is also required to be submitted. Let us move toward the third schedule, and the third schedule, it is a conduct of clinical trial. So it contains around 8 tables, this is the schedule which is having the large number of tables. The table 1 is related to the information to be submitted by an applicant for registration of the ethics committee. So, the ethics committee registration we have seen in detail in our other lecture. The second table related to the content of proposed protocol for conducting the clinical trial, this also we have seen in our previous lecture. Informed consent is in table number 3, we will see it in detail. Then table number 4, undertaking by the investigator, this is also not covered anywhere, so this will also see in detail. Data element for reporting SAE in a clinical trial or in a BA/BE study. Then table number 6 is structure, content and format for clinical trial report. This is also covered in one of the separate lecture. Table number 7 is the elements for the investigator brochure, and table number 8 for the prescribing information. So, table number 1, table number 2 and the table number 6 we have already covered in another lecture. So, we will just see, we will not go into the detail. So, this is a table number 1, data requirement and the data to be submitted for the registration of the ethics committee. So, detail about the ethics committee, detail about the ethics committee member and details about the composition, details about the procedure what they are going to follow, and the CVs of all the employees, their contact number, their detail, the site specific, that everything has to be given, that we have seen in our previous lecture. So, I am going to skip this. And also we have seen in this the format for according the approval to clinical trial protocol by ethics committee. So, this is the format, this also we have seen. The table number 2 is the content of the proposed protocol for conducting a clinical trial. So, we are having a separate lecture, we have seen in one of the separate lecture what are the content of the proposed protocol. So, this is with respect to study, the details of the drug, detail of the study including its protocol, design and the background, the preclinical data, then the study population, inclusion exclusion criteria, how to assess the study, who would be the principal investigator, that has been given in that schedule. Now, let us move toward the table number 3, which is a very important document, and it is the informed consent document. It is in the two form, that is informed consent form and informed consent patient information sheet. So, here in the table number 3, it has been actually divided into two parts. The first is checklist of informed consent document for clinical trial subjects. So, herein some essential elements has been given. I would just read this essential elements. So, these are there is a requirement of statement that the study involves research and explanation of the purpose of the research. So, that statement should be there, that study is involved only the research and its explanation for the purpose of the research. Then the next element is expected duration of the participation, whether it is 15 days, 10 days, that has to be mentioned into the informed consent form. Then description about the procedure to be followed, description of any reasonable foreseeable risk or discomfort to the subject, that is also required to be given, and what are the benefit the subject would likely get, that is also required to be given. Then disclosure of specific appropriate alternative procedure in case of if it is a phase 3 clinical trial or if it is a trial with the patient, then what are the alternative procedure they are having, that is also required to be given. Statement describing extent to which confidentially record identify subject will be maintained, that should be also the part of the informed consent form. Then trial treatment schedule, so how many times is undergoing the treatment, that schedule is required to be mentioned. Statement describing financial compensation, medical management. So, in case of any injury or any any SAE or in case of the death, so what would be the policy and whether the financial compensation management, medical management, so regarding that the statement has to be given. Then the explanation about whom to contact. So in case of any injury or in case of any SAE, so whom to contact, the detailed information like a phone number, fax number, that is required to be given. Then responsibility of subject on participation, what the subject has to be cooperated with and what is his responsibility, that should be given in ICF. Then statement that participation is voluntary, this is very important, that statement has to be given and it should not be the undue influence to the subject, and he has to give the there should be a voluntary and freely obtained informed consent form. Statement that there is a possibility of failure of the investigational product. The PI has to clearly mention and it has to be clarified that there may be possibility of the failure of the investigational product. The statement that in the case of placebo controlled trial, placebo administered that shall not have any therapeutic effect, that statement has to be given, or any other information pertinent to the study that is required to be given to the ICF. There are some additional elements which may be the statement may be required for foreseeable circumstances under which the participation of the subject may be determined by the investigator without his or her consent. So additional cost to the subject that may result from the participation in the study, or the consequences of the subject decision to withdraw from the research and the procedure for the termination of participation by the subject, or the statement that the study subject representative will be notified in timely manner if significant new findings develop during the course of the research which may affect the subject willingness to continue participation, that will be provided. Then approximate number of subject enroll in the subject, that can also be disclosed. So the second part of this informed consent is the format of informed consent form for subject participating into the clinical trial. So this is the format, it has been given into the new drug and clinical trial rule. So this format has to be followed by every CRO site and PI while giving the informed consent form. So here it is informed consent form to participate in clinical trial study, the title, study number, subject initial, and these details has to be given. The annual income of the subject is also very significant and essential, as there should be no exploitation of the poor people. That's why this annual income column has been mentioned here. Then these details where the study is going to conduct, what is the name of the PI, detail of the PI, to whom to contact, these things has to be covered. The table number 4, it is related to the undertaking by the investigator. So in the undertaking by the investigator, the full name, address, title of the PI or his investigator when there is no PI, so that detail has to be mentioned. Then where the conduct is to be conducted, the details of the medical college, hospital, that is required to be provided through the undertaking. Then name and address of all clinical laboratory facilities to be used in the study. Then name and address of the ethics committee which is going to continue the approval. Name of other members who are the co or sub investigators. Protocol, title and study number, that is to be mentioned. The commitment has to be given by the investigator that he has reviewed the clinical protocol and now he is agree that he is agree with the content of the protocol, and further the commitment regarding with the agreement of the content, he is agreed to conduct the study in accordance with the current protocol and the GCP guidelines. Further, the commitment has to be given that is he will personally conduct and supervise the clinical trial at his site. Then he should agree to inform all the trial subject that the drugs are being used for the investigational purpose, and he has to ensure that the requirement relating to the obtaining informed consent, ethics committee, review approval as specified in our new drug and clinical trial rule. He should agree to report the sponsor all the adverse experience that occur during the trial. Finally, he has to give in writing that he has read and understood the information in the investigator brochure, including potential risks and the side effect, and he is agreed to ensure that all the associate, colleagues, employee assisting in the conduct of the study are the qualified and well experienced. He has to give the agreement and he has to give the consent that he will maintain adequate and accurate record of all the audit inspection which is done by the sponsor or ethics committee or central licensing authority. Further, the commitment with respect to the promptly report of all the adverse event and SEs that has to be given. So let us move toward the table number 5, data elements for reporting SAE. So this we have, I think, not covered in any of our lecture. So these are the content of reporting the serious adverse event. The patient details, including the initial and other relevant identifiers, that is that has to be given, like a hospital or outpatient, OPD patient, and then is the gender, age, height, that is required to be given. Then what was the suspected drug, the generic name of that drug, the dosage form, indication, route of administration, by which the drugs which have adversely affected, the details of that drug has to be given. Apart from this, whatever the other treatment provided, that the details of that other treatment provided as is required to be submitted. And the important is detail of the SAE, like a full description of the event, including the body site and the severity, as well as the criteria for considering the report as a serious, why it is a serious, that is required to be given. And in addition to the description of the reported sign and symptoms, whenever possible, describe a specific diagnosis for the event, that is the start date or onset of event and the stop date, the de-challenge and re-challenge information. So that should be there. Then while conducting the trial, who was the investigator and the detail of the investigator, that is also required to be given. Now let us move toward the table number 6. It is a structure, content and format for clinical trial report. So as I have mentioned, this has been covered in one of our lecture, which is exclusively for how to report a clinical trial. So in the report, the detail of the study, the detail of the protocol, what was approved, then what was the investigational plan, how they have evaluated the study, what are the result, what are the references they have made, then what was the investigator brochure, then brief summary has to be given, highlighting the significant physical, chemical, pharmaceutical, pharmacological, all this, the summary has to be submitted along with the protocol. The protocol also should have this non-clinical information what they have conducted. So this we have already seen in one of our lecture, and now we will see the table number 8, which is for the prescribing information. What should be the content of the prescribing information? So in the prescribing information there should be a generic name, then qualitative and quantitative composition of the drug, dosage form, strength, the clinical particulars like therapeutic indication, the contraindication, posology, drug interaction is required to be given. Then the pharmacological properties including mechanism of action, pharmacodynamic, pharmacokinetic, then non-clinical properties like animal toxicology, pharmacology, pharmaceutical particulars like incompatibility if it is there, or the shelf life, that is also given in this table. The fourth schedule, it is the requirement and guideline for conduct of BAB study of new drug or investigational new drug. So here there are again 3 tables. The first is for the registration of BAB study center, second is data information for grant of permission to conduct BAB study, and the third is data information required for grant of permission to conduct BAB study of new drug already approved in the country, that we call subsequent new drug. So these are the content and these are the information required to be submitted for the registration of the BAB study center. So I think I have covered this in one of the lecture which is related to the BAB study center. We can have a look of this, the name and address of the organization, then document regarding legal identity, then list of SOPs and the list of employees, the infrastructure related documents and the details of the ethics committee, they are going to have the registration from that. Then facility maintenance record, that is required to be submitted. The table 2 is the data and information required for grant of permission to conduct BAB study of new drug or investigational new drug. So this is the regarding the chemical and pharmaceutical information, detailed introduction, then permission. For the permission, it is required to submit the published report, regulatory status, as what we have seen in the case of the clinical trial. It is also more somehow it is more or less it is similar, because BAB is also one of the clinical trial. So here also you require to give the regulatory status what is in the other countries, then prescribing information, undertaking by the PI, then study synopsis of the BAB, then certificate of analysis from the 3 batches of the subject. And for conducting the bioequivalence study with the reference to cytotoxic drug or the special type of drug, for example hormonal preparation, narcotic and psychotropic substances in healthy human subject, a scientific justification with a special emphasis on safety of subject with proper risk mitigation strategy should be submitted when there are special type of drug. And in case if regulatory guidance is available, that they have to provide a copy of the same. Table number 3 is data and information required for grant of permission to conduct BAB study of new drug already approved in the country. So if the drug is already approved, then some data can be abbreviated or omitted, otherwise the whatever the data we have seen in previous slide, it would be the same data. So you can see this is COA and the details of drug, details of the study conducted. The last we are having the 7th schedule, and it doesn't have any tables and the data requirement, but this is also important and it has not been covered in our previous lecture, that's why it has been captured here. It is actually an annexure, and this annexure contains the factor for calculation of the amount of the compensation. So various formulas has been given, like a formula you can see here, formula in case of clinical trial related death, that is B into F into R divided by 99.37, where B is the base amount factor and the risk factor. And the risk factor, how to calculate that has also been the grading scale has been given in this annexure. This grading scale is from 0.5 to 0.4, 0.5 in case of the terminally ill patient, and terminally ill means whose expected survival is not more than the 6 months. So in this case, what the factors to be considered, that is a 0.5 is the factor to be considered. The second is the factor 1 when patient with a high risk, and as the risk the if the expected survival between the 6 to 24 months, then we can say it is with the high risk, and the factor to be considered is 1. Subsequently it has given factor 2, 3 and 4. If the subject is healthy volunteer or trial subject, then there is a more risk and the factor is high. Similarly, the formulas has been given for the injury or death related to the clinical trial, when it is a permanent disability, when it is congenital anomaly, or if it is a life threatening disease, or if it is a reverse SI, then different formula, as I have shown in the slide, that has to be taken into consideration while calculating the compensation. So this is about the tables given in the New-Tech clinical trial rule. Let us have a recap. So what we have seen in this very lengthy lecture, that different tables given and the different requirement with respect to the application, with respect to the submission of data for the BAB study protocol, with respect to the BAB study center protocol, with respect to the conduct of a clinical trial for new drug, conduct of drug which is already approved, with respect to the ethics committee. Then further we have seen that what are the elements in the undertaking by the PI, what are the elements into the informed consent form, then the investigator brochure and the other things. So let us have questions for you. So the first question, the content of informed consent given in table 3 of which schedule? So you have to answer the which schedule is there for the content of informed consent. So it is the third schedule. The next question is the undertaking by the investigator given in which table of third schedule? So the first you have been asked the schedule, now here the table you have to mention. So it is a table number 4 of the third schedule. The number of table given in fourth schedule. So you have to answer how many numbers of tables are given. So there are 3 tables. So this is what about our all the course, and I hope you have enjoyed all the lectures, and if you have any queries with respect to any of the lecture, then you can give it into the feedback or you can share it to the forum, and certainly we will try to address your query in a very proper way and in a regulatory manner and as per the New Drug and clinical trial rule. So enjoy this all the topics and take care and bye bye. Thank you.